Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for thank you for coming. I'm sorry we had this bumpy start. It makes me even more nervous. So I chose to do this topic on Carson Valley School because I worked there for 4 years from 1968 to 1972. And it's on Wissahickon Avenue, as many of you know, and you've driven by it probably innumerable times, and people have said to me, what in the world is back there? So I thought, well, I would enlighten you since I have some experience with it. So I'm dividing it into 3 parts, and I think I'm going to have to hasten my pace. So the founding of it as Carson College for Orphan Girls, and then it became Carson Valley School, and finally now it exists as Carson Valley Children's Aid. So, no, where do I advance the slide? Oh, wait. How do I do? Oh, the arrow up.
Yeah, just use the arrows.
All right, and now where are the notes?
There are no notes on that.
But okay, right. So there. Okay. So Carson was founded by Robert Niedermark Carson, who lived between 1846 and 1907. Not a lot is known about him, but he was a very wealthy man who accumulated his wealth first in street railroads, horse and car lines. Then he branched into owning interests in electrified trolley car companies, and then electrically powered interurban rail lines. He and his wife Isabel had no children. In 1903, he prepared a will that directed an orphanage with his name to be located not less than 50 nor more than 100 acres of his 225-acre Erdenheim stock farm. It turned out that only 87 acres were developed. The property was contiguous to the Widener estate and went back to Mill Road. So it's along Wissahickon Avenue and part of Bethlehem Pike, and then all along Mill Road. Mr. Carson further stipulated that the orphanage be for white orphan girls with both parents deceased, similar to Girard College. The girls were to be 6 years of age, but not more than 10 on admission, and they could not be admitted from another orphanage or similar institution. They were to live in cottages with no more than 25 girls. And I was going to read something from his will, but it's too long. The reason I wanted to read it is to hear his language and the words that he used, but I think we'll go on. And now, next slide, I go up. I do the up or this, the right arrow. All right, so the buildings and architecture, they chose Albert Kelsey as the architect. He lived in Chestnut Hill, obtained his degree in architecture from the University of Pennsylvania in 1895 and became nationally known. He designed the campus to feel like a 16th century English village and created the cottages as they were called then, in the Tudor Gothic motif. Each cottage was given the name of a flower or tree, and or a Mother Goose rhyme. They were all built in Chestnut Hill stone and from a local quarry. And the stone is colored with gray, brown, and sometimes bluish, which contain mica and glistened in the sunlight. So he created the cottages in such a way that the roadway wound through the property. The tile work on the roof was from the Enfield Pottery and Tile Works, located in Enfield. And which is known as Orland. Now, I always thought that the tile came from Spain because that's what I remember being told when we were there, but that doesn't seem to be the case. I couldn't find anything about that. So I'm going to skip ahead. So this was Mother Goose, and it was originally called Cornflower, but it was changed to Mother Goose, and all the buildings were built except for Lower Beach and Upper Beach. The three buildings were built between 1917 and 1920. So you can see here, where is the pointer? Is there a pointer here?
This is the Carson.
Do they see that? I don't see it.
Yeah,
You see it? Okay, so there's the Mother Goose up in that in that space under the roof. This is the main entrance to Mother Goose. You can see the really pretty tile. And this is another view of Mother Goose. It was a pretty large building. Narcissus became Red Gables. And you can see all the flowers that are on this peak of the roof. And this is the doorway with the narcissus all around the doorway. This is Stork Hill, which was originally named Primrose, and you can see the stork with the baby here on this part right under the roof. That's another view of Stork Hill. And then this was Thistle, and Thistle was always Thistle. So there you can see there are some flowers along here, up along the peak of that roof. So there was a garage for several vehicles and farm equipment that was also built, that was attached to Thistle. Upper Beach and Lower Beach were both built from 1930 to 31. And they chose a different architect then. There had been some problem between the board and Miss Hewlin with Albert Kelsey. So they chose this other architect, Mr. Barney, and it really was a nice project for the girls to be somewhat part of because they could observe the building process. They went down to the docks on the Delaware River to see the raw lumber coming in from the Pacific Northwest, and then to the lumber yard to see it sawed into boards for the new cottages. And they went to the quarry where the stone was supplied. And then they would visit the building sites and talk with the workmen, take notes and photographs, and make a project book. So in 1991, all of the houses at Carson were listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So this is kind of what it looked like by 1938. So this is Wissahickon Avenue running along here. And you enter the property in this driveway, go through this grove of trees, which is still there. And down here, this building to the right became Upper Beach, and this is Lower Beach down here. And you wind around. Here is Mother Goose and Red Gables attached. And along down here, over it is Stork Hill, and then this is Thistle. Mr. Carson also had this fanciful idea about how young ladies should be treated. And he wanted to have tunnels built between Mother Goose and all of the buildings because he didn't want the young ladies to get rained upon during inclement weather. But it really was not very doable, but there is a tunnel between Mother Goose and Red Gables. And that was always a little bit of a challenge because if you went down and tried to go over to Red Gables, you needed to make sure that the door on the other end was unlocked. And vice versa. If the kids wanted to come over to Mother Goose and not go outside, they had to know that the door would be open for them. So Miss Hewlin, Elsa Hewlin, was the first president that was selected for Carson. She grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in a progressive household. Her father was a practicing attorney, and her mother was active in the women's suffrage movement in Minnesota, and also an advocate of educational reform. Elsa graduated from the University of Minnesota in 1909, and that summer she went to Weymouth, Massachusetts to visit a friend. And while she was there, she was invited to New York City to visit the Richmond Hill Settlement House, and ended up staying there and accepting a position as a house worker, which was very much against her parents' wishes. But while she was in New York, she explored all parts of the city, especially Greenwich Village, where the settlement house was located. And she attended suffrage meetings and participated in reform activities. And she was part of a protest against the working conditions in the city's garment industry. But she also went to national protests where she interfaced with a lot of different people. So she enrolled in the School of Philanthropy in New York, which was a pioneer institution to train social workers, which ultimately became Columbia University School of Social Work. While she pursued some courses in economics, she got a degree in economics from Columbia in 1911. And then she, for whatever reason, she left New York in 1914 and took a teaching position in Gary, Indiana, that was headed by a man whose name was William Wirt, who formed the Gary Plan, and he was a student of John Dewey. And Wirt believed that the school experience should have 4 principal parts: play, exercise, intellectual study, and special projects. So with her background and experience and qualities, Carson chose her to be their first president. So you can see she was there a very long time. So Carson College opened its doors July 1st of 1918 with 10 girls. So not all of the buildings were built, obviously, and so they were all in that one building in Red Gables. The Mother Goose was the administrative building. So it increased to 42 in 1919, and by 1931 there were 124 girls in the college. The school day was pretty long. They started at 8:45 in the morning to 4:45 in the afternoon, with an hour for lunch, and from 12:15 to 1:45. And the extended break was so that the girls could go back to their cottages and do chores. So they had the traditional types of study in their curriculum, along with extracurricular programs. And how they worked was they sort of worked in teams. So there would be one team that did, let's say, academics, and then the other ones were doing the special projects, and then they would switch probably after lunch. There was a farm, and they forgetting my notes just do pop up. So the girls helped with the farm work in addition to their household chores. They tilled the soil, harvested crops, fed the animals, the horses, the pigs, the chickens, and the sheep, and grew and processed and preserved a variety of fruits and vegetables. Oops. And all of this provided food for the college. They learned how to shear sheep, prepare the wool for spinning, and learned weaving. Albert Kelsey had a very elaborate set of plans for the farm buildings, which the board decided was not affordable, but instead in 1918, they purchased 11 acres of farmland along Bethlehem Pike that was contiguous to the Carson property. It had a farmhouse, outbuildings, and a barn. The owners of the property had a strong connection to Carson and were willing to have them purchase it. The farmhouse was named Orchard, and it exists today along Bethlehem Pike. And you'll see the big sign that says CVCA. And that's where the administrative offices, I believe, are today for the organization. In 1958, the poultry farm was closed. It was determined that it was more cost effective to buy eggs in the store rather than raise the chickens to produce the eggs. And the dairy farm continued until it was closed in 1964. They also had started a nursery school in 1924. And this was a wonderful opportunity for the girls to learn another vocational skill in childcare. So it was for the children in the community, mostly from Chestnut Hill and Mount Airy, but wherever, this whole area. It closed in 1937, but then was revived in 1949. And it was still in existence when I was there, but I don't know whether it is now or not. So during the Depression, there was a lack of the enrollment decreased, and there were several bad investments that were made. And so in 1937, they closed the school. And they also went to the Orphans Court to have a petition and filed a petition for half orphans to be accepted to increase the enrollment. So a half orphan is a child who has one parent still living, as opposed to both of them being deceased. So now we are at Carson Valley School, and with the ending of the war, and the men coming home from the war and eligible for free education under the GI Bill, they started getting calls about men applying to go to college. So it wasn't a college at all. So they wanted to change the name to identify what it was more appropriately. So they tossed around several different names and settled on Carson Valley School, which I think is puzzling because it still wasn't a school. It was, there were no children living there then because they closed it in 1937. So I don't, anyway. So all during this time, Miss Hewlin was at the helm, and now she's about 70 years old and getting tired. So there. Well, that's my word. So there was a woman whose name was Dorothy Moore. She went by Dot. She was from the area, and she started working at Carson as a bookkeeper in 1930. And then in 1947, she was promoted to the position of business manager and assistant to Miss Hewlin. So they became very close, had a good working relationship as well as a personal friendship. And Hewlin appointed her, asked for her to succeed her in 1958. So Moore was there a very short time. She just really, took the the orphanage, the school, in the direction that it was going. She didn't make any major changes. She just kept the status quo. But as time went on, the kids that were getting referred were more and more disturbed, and she felt that she really wasn't qualified to be the director. So she resigned in 1964. And then enter F. Herbert Barnes, my favorite person in the world. He became the director in 1964. And was there until 1972. And he grew up in Cheltenham, had a bachelor's degree from the University of Pennsylvania in English, and intended to go to law school. He worked at the farm at Carson the summer of 1948, which changed everything for him. The manager of the farm recommended to Miss Hewlin that Barnes be appointed, that Barnes be a part-time recreation assistant in the afternoons during his senior year at Penn. Barnes became so interested in the work and asked Hewlin how he could have a career in child welfare. Following her advice, he went on to the Bank Street School and then to the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work to earn a Master of Social Work degree. After graduate school, he had a variety of positions, first as a teacher at the Poughkeepsie Day School, affiliated with the Child Study Department of Vassar College, then a caseworker at the Pennsylvania Training School in Canonsburg that was run by the Pennsylvania Department of Public Welfare. In 1958, he went to the Children's Aid Society here in Philadelphia, where he worked in foster care and developed a special program training foster parents to care for emotionally disturbed children. And then he became clinical director of the Wallingford home in Wallingford. So in Barnes, they found the perfect replacement for Dot Moore, and he came on board in 1964. And it wasn't a school. It was, children went out to the public schools in the Springfield Township. Herb referred to it as an intentional community or a therapeutic milieu. He had some idea of patterning it in a similar way to Summerhill, which many of you might be familiar with. It's a school in England founded by Alexander Sutherland Neal. And Neal had the idea that schools should be made to fit the child and not the other way around. And run on the principle of giving freedom to the children and the staff through democratic governance. The children could behave as they wished as long as they caused no harm to others or themselves. While Carson was not a school at all, we adapted some of the philosophy, and Carson was an open and permissive atmosphere, fairly free, but there were rules and there was structure, and the kids couldn't do just what they wanted, like at Summerhill. So it was referred to as a group living center and a residential treatment center for neglected and dependent and emotionally disturbed children. And the children's emotional problems they had to manage the public school system. So they couldn't be too disturbed because they had to go out to public school. We got referrals from a wide variety of sources, from child welfare agencies from the surrounding counties, the court system, and sometimes the kids were termed incorrigible. And we also got private placements. Sometimes families were not able to manage their own children, and so they would voluntarily turn them over to a child welfare agency, and then the agency would seek the best placement for that child. So foster care was not always a good option for some children. Some children really needed to be more in an environment of living with others. It's more like in a family setting. Boys were also admitted in 1947. And again, it was through the Orphans Court in Montgomery County. So Mr. Carson's will never really had to be broken in the truest sense. Petitions were just made to the court to alter it to accommodate these new ideas. So racial integration was one of the first challenges that Barnes faced. With the passage of the Civil Rights Act by Congress, he put a plan in place to accomplish this. There was an attorney on the board who was very much in favor, as was the whole board. And this attorney composed a document that was presented to the Orphans Court of Montgomery County. When there were no objections, then the board and Barnes proceeded with their plans. The first African-American house mother was hired in 1966. And the first African-American children, a family of 4 girls, came in 1967. The intake process for admission was done by our casework supervisor in collaboration, mostly with Herb, but sometimes we would be involved in deciding whether the child would be a good fit for us. We also had to figure out where they would be placed in the house. Usually when a child was admitted, that was the house that they lived in the whole time they were there. So when there was a vacancy, that was where that child would go. There was just one exception. It was one of my kids one time. She was in one of my houses, and she was not getting along very well with the house mother. And it all centered around dating. And she was a very pretty girl, shy, but she was dating this young man from Flower Town, and he was a little bit older. He had graduated from high school, and this house mother just couldn't understand what he was doing with this girl. And so it was always a challenge that I mean, she would say, why is he interested in her? Why this? Why that? So I just decided they weren't going to stop seeing each other. I thought we needed to figure out a different atmosphere for them to be together. So we moved her into the other house that was also assigned to me. And there was a lot more freedom and less questions asked. So the kids lived in 5 houses. 3 of them you saw before. Upper Beach and well, Lower Beach was for boys. All the 4 other houses were for girls. The capacity there were 25 kids in each house, and they weren't always all full. Traditionally, there had been house parents, a single, widowed, or divorced house mother. They lived in 5 days a week and had relief staff on the weekends. We moved away from this model to childcare workers who worked shifts. We had both couples and single persons, and they usually worked 4 days on and then 3 days off. And then they alternated weeks, but the staff in each house worked out their own schedule. We had several male staff who were conscientious objectors, and several husbands took college or graduate courses. So there was one exception to this. There was a house mother in Upper Beach, one of my houses. She had been there for a long time, and she had been a widow, and or she was a widow, and she raised her children there. Her son had graduated, and her daughter was in high school, had 2 years to finish. And so she stayed until her daughter graduated. And then she found housing in the community and left. And then there were childcare workers in that house as well. I hustle here. So the houses had rules and they had guidelines. We developed a care plan for each child that was in concert with the staff in the house that they lived in and the caseworker. And a big focus of ours was changing behavior. If you always had the same outcome for something and you didn't like that outcome, that you could change your behavior and have a different outcome that would be more beneficial and more positive. So the role of the caseworker, there were 3 of us, 2 of us women for the girls' houses and 1 for the boys' house. We worked with individual children and their parents, both separately and together. And part of our work was to try to unify families if it was going to be possible. We would arrange family visits, either at Carson or they could go home. We had regular team meetings with the child care staff to discuss issues that were going on in each of the houses. We would have conferences and meetings with the staff from the different referring agencies and the court. And we interfaced with the public schools. And I want to tell a funny story about that. There was the male caseworker, he resigned, and before another hire was made, I was asked to fill in temporarily for the boys. So there came a call one day from the elementary school that so-and-so was being discharged from school and somebody had to come for him. And so I was asked to go. The childcare workers were not available. So I go to the elementary school and I'm ushered into the principal's office. I pass the kid on the way who's sitting out in a chair. And I didn't know what all this was about. So I go into the principal's office. He sits me down and he fumbles in his bottom drawer, pulls out this drawing, and he shows it to me. He said, "Look at this. What do you think this is? What does this look like?" And I mean, I was dumbfounded. What it looked like was a person sitting on the river by a body of water fishing, because there was a stick. It was like a stick figure, and there was a stick up and then a line in the water. And I said, "Well, it looks like somebody fishing." And he said, "Really?" And so I just couldn't imagine. And I said, "Well, so what is this about?" And he said, "Well, so-and-so was holding court in the lunchroom and made this drawing. And as he made the drawing, the way he drew it and so forth, it ended up that it was a couple having intercourse." Well, it It was all I could do to keep from bursting out laughing. I mean, I just thought this whole thing was so ridiculous. And I mean, and if you knew the kid, I said, well, I said, you know, he's in the 6th grade. Aren't they getting sex education? I said, I remember getting it in either the 5th or 6th grade. So aren't they learning about sex? Well, that's not the point. And I said, well, what is the point? Well, so he said, well, why was he doing it in school? And I said, well, you know, I have no idea. So I said, how do you want to resolve this? Well, he's expelled for 3 days. I said, oh, no. I said, no. I said, that's not acceptable. I said, this is really nothing. And I said, may I have the drawing and I'll take him home. And he said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, I said, I'm going to take him home and he'll have a discussion with the child care workers who are in charge of him. And if we need to involve Mr. Barnes, we will. And thank you very much. May I have the paper and I'll collect him and we'll go. And he will be back in school tomorrow. He said, no, one day. I said, well, all right, one day. He'll be back the day after tomorrow. So that was my big interface with the public school. We also had regular supervision with our casework supervisor. We had a wonderful relationship with the Montgomery County Mental Health Clinic. And we had 10 slots there for the kids who were more troubled and they needed more psychiatric intervention. We also had a monthly meeting with an adolescent psychiatrist who came and we did case presentation. So a child would be presented to him and he would have the information, the write-up beforehand and know what our concerns were. And he would interview the child and then meet with us afterwards and we would process, you know, he would help us with interventions that we could make that might be more beneficial to the child. And we also had a clinical psychologist work with us weekly for the child care team meetings. Because Mr. Barnes was sort of going towards having child care model be a little more professional. And so he wanted to, you know, get some training for the child care workers. We had a big, I want to say a little bit more about that. Is that what I want to do? No. We had a wonderful activities director who was one of the child care workers for the boys. He and his wife were child care workers, but he ran the activities program. There was a terrific gym and there was always activity going on down in the gym, basketball games, volleyball. But one of the things we had summer trips. The activities director would apply for grants for money to take trips during the summer. And there was always an intern from one of the colleges that was hired for the summer. And sometimes we had an intern for the whole year. But we went to Montreal to the site of the World's Fair. We went to the White Mountains several times. I hiked Mount Washington with 6 kids and 2 male child care workers. So there was 1 girl and 5 boys, the 2 of them and me. We had a wonderful day. It was just terrific. The other thing on one of the trips to the White Mountains, we rented this van while we were there to make it easier to get around. We went in the big yellow school bus everywhere. So one of the trips we rented a van. Well, I was on the Kangamangas Highway driving this van with 13 kids. And there was a malfunction of the van. So when I would put the brake on, it would speed up. instead of slow. And, we would accelerating, we would be going 40 miles an hour and then I would brake and it would shoot up to 70 or 80. It was awful. I was so nervous and I knew what I had to do. We had to pull over and turn off the motor. But if you've ever been on the Kangamangas Highway, that's not very easy to do. So we also needed to do it near a house because I had to then figure out who of the kids that was in this car with me that I was going to send to a house to make a phone call back to the campsite so that somebody could come for us. So that was very much of a challenge. And there was a girl sitting behind me who was really quite disturbed. And she was shaking my shoulders, screaming in my ear, "Miss McGran, you're going to kill us all." And I thought, yes, you're right. And all I could see was the headlines in the newspaper. Carson Valley caseworker kills 13 emotionally disturbed kids. So finally, we were able to find a spot to turn, that we could pull over and I could turn off the ignition. And then the most responsible kid that was in the car with me, there was a house that was close by and I had her go back to the house and then help came. So anyway, that was pretty harrowing. So in the summer of 1970, Mr. Barnes went to Switzerland for the International Conference on Child Care Training. And he came back very excited about the training and use of professional clinical child care workers in Europe. So in 1971, he brought 2 French professionals to Carson on a grant from a local donor, and they called themselves educateurs. And in France, an educateur, as they explained, was a highly trained professional capable of responding to any of the needs presented by the 12 to 15 maladjusted children in his or her care. So Barnes referred to this program as EduCare, EDUCARE, and he presented it to the board. And while the board was very much in favor of it and understood the concept, there were no funds for it. And so Mr. Barnes was very eager to carry out his idea and this concept, and he resigned. And he ended up buying an out-of-service ski resort in Manchester, New Hampshire, called Spruce Mountain. And his idea was that he was going to set up his own little, environment and, hire people and train them the way he wanted to. So that was crushing to me because he was really my role model. I learned so much from him. I always called him my impeccable professional. He just had very sound social work principles, and he was very fair. He could be stern, but I learned a lot from him. And my office was right next to his, and he was a tall man, and he walked with a rather heavy gait. So you could always hear him coming down the hall, and the floors were all wooden, and so they all creaked because it was an old building. And so I could hear him lumbering down the hallway every morning when he came in. And sometimes my door would be open, and sometimes he would just come in and sit down and say, "Well, can we talk a little bit?" So it was really a wonderful relationship. And so he left in June, in the spring of 72. And I decided that I was going to leave too, because there was one of my girls who had me a little mixed up about what I was to her. I was everything. I was her caseworker. I was her best friend. I was her mother. I was her psychiatrist. And she resented I think is the best word I could use, that I had a life that didn't include her, that I went home at night and, she was at Carson. So she would structure things that there would be some kind of a fight or some sort of a ruckus in the house. And the child care worker on duty wasn't able to control her. So I would get these calls after I got home that so-and-so acted up, and I had to come back. And finally I said, I'm not doing it. I said, I'm not on call. There is somebody on call. You need to call them. And I did go several times, but then I saw that it was getting to be a pattern, and then I refused. But for my own mental health, I needed to leave, and for my own life, I needed to leave. So after John Taft was hired after Mr. Barnes retired, after he left. And he was the one that was he was there for a long time. He was there for 39 years, but he was the one that was instrumental in taking it in the direction that it is today. He inherited it. There was when the time that Herb left, there was a lot of, it was in disarray for several years. So Taft really had a job, revitalizing the institution and getting it on better footing. And so he took it back to having there be a school on grounds, and it was very structured, and it became a residential treatment program in the truest sense. And then he was the one that engineered the merger between Carson Valley School and Montgomery County, the Children's Aid Society. So there is a very brief video. We were late getting started, so I want to show the video, but I need your help.
Stop sharing.
So do I do new share? Oh, stop share there. Okay.
Share again.
Here.
And where is that?
Here it should be here.
Double click. Can you
Highlight it.
I guess just if it doesn't know, highlight it and then go
And then
Control C. And then go to you can send there with Control V. Is that
okay, so here's a very short video. If we can, how do we play? 5 minutes.
yeah, why did it not? Why is it not showing?
Here we go. Here we go.
People at home are seeing.
What?
In 1907, Robert Carson filled
Oh,
out.
we're
the
not
property
seeing
deed,
it
left
here.
$5 million in his will to establish.
Seeing the Word document only on
Constructed
Zoom.
young girls. In 1917, construction started, and by 1920, the Carson Valley School was fully operational. On
We can
100
hear
acres
it.
of farmland near Chestnut Hill. Now
we
the
can't see it.
Flower Mound campus. Carson Valley School and Children's Aid Society merged in 2008, creating Carson Valley Children's Aid, providing services for 12,000 individuals each year. Today, in addition to the residential and education programs on our campus, we provide an array of interventions and support in the home, at school, and throughout the community for children and families at risk I would like you to meet some of our staff who will describe these programs that empower
That
individuals
looks like it.
to achieve their goals to be successful in life. And some of our youth will share their experiences, difficulties overcome, and hopes for the future.
It's the same thing again.
My name is Joseph Griffin, and I am the campus director of Carson Valley's Children's Therapy. I am honored to be celebrating 100 years with Carson Valley. I grew up believing that who you are and where you are today does not define who you will become in the future.
I don't know what.
I leave you with this poem that I've used my entire life. It's called Yesterday. I am where I am. I know where I could have been.
Yeah.
Had I done what I was supposed to do
What to do.
yesterday. Tell me, friend, what must I do today to be where I need to be tomorrow? Forget about yesterday. And that's what we here at Carson is all about, helping people change their lives. Thank you.
I use horticulture as a mechanism to get the kids hands-on, involved in hands-on activities, and also to enhance my learning lessons. So far, it's been pretty successful, and I hope to continue my programs over the next coming years.
I would still be running away. I would still be going through the abuse I was with, and I would just be stuck in the past instead of moving on into the future, starting high school, preparing to go to college, and doing AIC and making new friends and new connections and moving on and letting go from the past instead of the future.
I'm Charlotte Anderson. I'm the clinical director for the residential treatment facility for Carson Valley Children's Aid. I've worked here for a long time, and I work here because I choose to
People at
work
home
here.
see.
Our goal
They are.
is to
Yeah,
help
homeless.
kids
Yep.
who need help.
Sure.
Kids who have not had a lot of advantages, kids who have had a lot of hard and horrible things happen to them in their lives. To help those kids get themselves back to where they want to be, to where their families want them to be, to get them back with their family, fully what we call successful to what they want in their lives.
Hi, my name is Juan. I'm 16 years old. I've been in Carson for a month and a half now. Carson is
I don't know what to
really
do.
bettered me with my social skills,
Should we just stop it?
with everything really. It's giving me opportunities that I don't get at home. And
I'm at a loss.
it's what I really look for. I really needed this, so yeah.
Carson has helped me like grow, like basically grow up. Also helped me like get to like trust people, get to like
Can't get it
let people
stopped.
in and stuff. Because when I first got here, I was hard. Nobody wanted to talk to me. Like I was just the worst.
All right, well, does anybody have any questions?
I do have one suggestion, and that is send us the link for that.
I
And we can
can.
watch it on our own
Yeah.
computers. I think that'd be a good idea. I have, I guess it's a question, I guess I found out the answer. That is how they got funded for, so the merger probably made the difference for the last set of ability to continue, right? Financially.
That's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that's why they did it.
I have two comments. We lived in Springfield Township, so when I first moved there, they had a nursery school, a rather robust one with, I think, 4 classrooms. And I was going around looking at nursery schools for my younger child, making sure that there was no religious instruction. Seemed like perfect. However, I got there and it was a very robust program, but it felt rigid to me. And so I didn't choose it, but the grounds were gorgeous. And the building was wonderful and all that stuff. It's huge. The other thing though is this was in 1976. So after a lot of what you've discussed. And then what I did hear was our kids were in the Springfield schools. And first of all, there were virtually no Black kids in the school, one in each class of 120 kids. Once you got toward high school, you did have some, for a while at least, some Carson Valley kids, and some of them were Black. And of course, they were not always the best of behaviors or academically the strongest. Some of them may have been, but I think the combination of the color and the behavior created additional prejudice within the township. Eventually that, there weren't enough minorities of any kind
Yeah, there
do
was
cause,
great,
but
there was great stigma. And the
Yeah.
kid, I mean, being a Carson kid was the first one. But then the Black children, you know, they all knew that the Black kids lived at Carson, so it was a double for them, yeah.
yeah, it was distressing to me because I had hoped we'd be in an area where there were more mix, and this didn't mix at all, so. Thank you.
I just had one comment. Our friends sent their 2 daughters to nursery school at Carson, and they loved it. They loved
Okay,
it.
Well,
good.
yes,
Very successful.
the nursery school had nothing to do with the residential program.
Yeah, I know.
It's totally separate, and they just used our facilities, so
Oh,
there was no connection with, and that's not how it started, but that's how it ended up.
yeah.
Yes, Martha?
I have more of a request than a question. The video that we're not seeing,
Right,
couldn't you send that as an attachment
I-
on the form?
yes, Tony asked that, I can do that, yeah.
Repeat the question, please.
It was your idea about sending the link of the video out.
Okay. It was a good idea.
It was a good idea, Tony, thank you. So Muriel,
I don't have a question, but I have 2 comments. Anyone who's driven the Kank, as it was called, the highway that she was describing, where she had a difficult time controlling a school bus. Oh,
so is Martha's mic?
Oh, is this one more? Anyone who has driven on the Kank, as it's called, its nickname, driving a school bus that had issues with the steering and the power, it has to give you a gold star. That is just amazing.
It was pretty.
And secondly,
And I don't imagine there were seatbelts.
No.
my second comment is, does everyone know the background of Dr. Barnes?
Well, no, he wasn't a doctor.
No, he was not, but he called himself that, I think, at times. He made his fortune developing, he was a pharmacist. He made his fortune
It's a different,
developing a nose drop.
No. Different Barnes.
no. It's a different barn.
He didn't develop Argyro.
No, it's a different Barnes. What
That
I-
was the Barnes from the Barnes Foundation, the museum, the art museum. That's that Barnes.
So I really wanted to kind of explain how I got to Carson, because it was really kind of a stroke of luck. I had started a job in '68 in January at another children's institution. And while I loved what I did there, the man who was the director was a little strange. And I knew when I interviewed with him that he seemed a little odd, but I didn't realize, but I loved the setting. It was in a big old mansion, and there were about 20 kids, boys and girls. And I just loved the concept and the smallness of it. And so I thought, well, I can manage him. But when I got there, he just became more and more strange. And our family has a house in Stone Harbor on 2nd Avenue near the bird sanctuary. And that's early that summer in June, I was out on our porch, and this big yellow school bus came by Carson Valley School. And I thought, well, I wonder what that's all about. And so, and I saw the guy who was driving it. I had no idea who it was, but about a couple weeks after that, I got this flyer in the mail about Carson having an all-day in-service program. And it must have been on activities. To this day, I don't remember what it was, but I went to it, and driving into it was like magic. I mean, it's just such a beautiful property, and I just thought, oh, this is wonderful. And so the whole day was terrific. I met the activities director, who was the guy driving the school bus, and met the casework supervisor. Of course, I met Mr. Barnes, and I went away thinking, well, this would just be a wonderful place. Well, a couple of weeks later, I get a call from the casework supervisor saying that there was an opening for a caseworker, and might I be interested in coming to interview? Well, I leapt at the chance, and I went, and then I got hired, and I left where I was and went there in September. So I wasn't even at this, at the original institution for even a year. But that's how I got there, and it was just meant to be.
Kathleen, on that note, I think we're going to close.
I think so. Yeah.
In keeping with the
Thank you,
college
everybody, for
regulations.
for
Thank you
bearing
so
with
much.
us.
That was
Thank you,
so
Kathleen.
interesting. Thank
That was
you.
great.